All right, let's continue on. So now on this next one, it says to find area and perimeter. And so since this is a circle, these are the formulas that we're going to be using in figuring out the circle. But how is it that we know what the radius is? If we were to just go ahead and draw a line right here, here's the radius. And so if we count the units, 1, 2, 3, 4, then you're going to find out that the radius is 4. And so now we can go ahead and figure out, let's do the area first. So area, since radius is 4, then it's going to be pi times 4 squared, which ends up being 16 pi, if we want to just keep it in terms of pi. If we were to go ahead and just round it, just for the sake so that you can make sure that you're on the right track, or unless it asks you to round, then 16 pi is approximately 50.265. And remember that it is units squared. Whenever we use the units squared, students tend to want to square the number. They want to put it right here. If you square the number, it's going to be totally something else. Please do not do that. You square the unit, not the number. So in other words, if we were to look at figuring out the measurement, the area of this circle, we're taking 50 of these squares and we're putting it all inside the circle here. Okay, so just be really careful with that. Now let's find the perimeter of the circle. Just remember that perimeter and circumference means the same thing. So we are using C equals 2 pi r, and the radius is 4. So we're going to go 2 pi times 4. And basically we can go ahead and we can use multiply those together. And so we would have 8 pi. If we were to go ahead and round this, then the circumference will be approximately 25.133. Okay, now remember the area is in square units and circumference is it's in one dimension, so it's a single unit. So in other words, if we were to take this edge of this circle right here and we were to lay it along a straight line, it would be approximately 25 of those units that would measure the length of this. So just remember that this is units squared, and this one is going to be 8 pi units. All right, find the coordinates of the midpoint of hx if h is at -3 and x is 7, -1. So this is our formula that we're having to use here. We're trying to figure out what the midpoint is. So we end up adding our x's. So I'll just put right here that this is x1, y1. This is x2, y2. So we're going to be adding the x's and then dividing it by 2. So let's go ahead and let's do that. So it's -1 plus 7 divided by 2. The next thing is that we're going to be looking at is the y's values. So you're going to take these y values and you're going to add them and divide it by 2. So we have -1 plus 3 divided by 2. The order doesn't matter. The only time that order matters is if we're dealing with slope. and we haven't gotten to that part yet. We will, but not yet. Negative 1 plus 7 is 6, so it's 6 over 2. And negative 1 plus 3 is 2, so it's 2 over 2. So my midpoint is going to be 3, 1. Okay, on this one we find the other endpoint. If one endpoint is at 14, negative 8, and the midpoint is at 5, 8. So we're still going to use this formula. The only thing is that we've got to split this up. So we know that our midpoint ends up being some kind of coordinate point right here. Okay, but we want to split these up. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do that. We're going to look at the midpoint of x is where you're going to add your x's. And just remember that your x1 and x2, those are the end points. Okay, now let's look at splitting it up with the y's. And so you've got y1. So you're looking at the endpoints here for your y's as well. Okay, and so we're given that our midpoint is 5, 8. So our midpoint for the x is 5, and our midpoint for our y is 8. And so we're going to plug those values in here. So instead of having the midpoint of x, I'm going to put 5 right here. All right. We end up just adding the x's and divide it by 2. And remember, the x's are the endpoints. We only know one of them. So the x value of one of the endpoints is 14. So I'm going to go x plus 14 divided by 2. Now the midpoint for my y is going to be 8. So that's what I'm going to substitute. The y1 and y2 are the endpoints. We only know one of them. And one of them ends up being just, let's see, it ends up being, let's see. Had to look at it, but it's negative 8. And so we divide it by 2. So now we're going to go ahead and do our steps to figure out what the other endpoint is. And we got to do it separately. We got to solve it separately to figure out what the x coordinate is and what the y coordinate is. So here we're going to, you notice that the 2 is locked up right here. It's locking up right here. So in order to unlock it, we've got to multiply by 2 on both sides. So 2 times 5 is 10 equals, and the whole reason why we did this is so that that would unlock it. So we have x plus 14. We subtract 14 on both sides. And 10 minus 14 is negative 4. And so our x coordinate is going to be negative 4. Let's look over here on the other side here. So we've got to unlock this one as well. So that's unlocked. 2 times 8 is 16 equals y plus negative 8 is the same as y minus 8. We want to add 8 on both sides. And this goes away. That's what we want. And so 16 plus 8 is 24. So I want to just make sure that everybody is very clear. So we would say the other endpoint is at negative 4, 24. All right, so on this one, we need to find perimeter on the coordinate plane. And so I will show you how to do it 2 different ways. First of all, one of them we can figure out right away just by counting the units, and it's AB, because it's going just right along the grid here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So we know that the length of AB is 4. Let's go ahead and figure out the length of BC. So BC, just make sure that when you're finding perimeter, you have to indicate which side that you're wanting to find the length of. All right, and so BC, just as a reminder, that distance is the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. We've got to use that distance formula. So if we were to look at BC, the BC, it would be the x's, so it would be negative 6 minus negative 3, so negative 6 minus negative 3. We end up squaring that. These are the x's. And then the y's is 6 minus 4. So 6 minus 4, and we're going to square it. And then this becomes the square root. So we clean this up right here. So negative 6 plus 3 is negative 3, and we square. Plus 6 minus 4 is 2, and we still square it. Square root is not gone yet. Just remember that whenever you square any number in the using the distance formula, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, it will always be positive. We tend to want to think that negative 3 squared equals negative 9, and that is not true. So then we have 9 plus 4, still the square root, which ends up being the square root of 13. That is one method that we can use here. The other method is something that I would prefer. So I'm going to try BC again. And so if I was to go ahead and draw a right triangle, then this length is 2 and this length is 3. And then I know that this is a right angle, and I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem. And so the BC is the hypotenuse of this right triangle. And so if I was to go ahead and I'm going to work over here, because I'm wanting you to see the comparison. We would have the square root of the legs, 2 squared plus 3 squared, which is 4 plus 9, which looks exactly the same here, and we have square root 13. So that's really preferably what I would rather use, okay? So let's go ahead and let's fill in. I know that AB is 4, and BC is square root 13. I'm going to use the method, since I showed you using the distance formula. Well, I'm going to use the method using the Pythagorean theorem. So here I'm trying to figure out the length of CD, which this length is 2 and this length is 3, which ends up being pretty much like what the length of BC is. And so we would end up writing out that CD is also the square root of 13, but I can go ahead and show you that it ends up being 2 squared plus 3 squared, which is the square root of 13. So that's the length of CD. Now let's look at the length of AD, and I want to clean this up so that you guys can see it. So I'm going to draw my right triangle. So I go down this way, and I go right. I always go along the grid. So this length is 1, 2, 3, 4. This length is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to go ahead and use the Pythagorean theorem. I'm going to indicate that it's AD. So AD equals the square root of 6 squared plus 4 squared, which is 36 plus 16, still under the square root, which is the square root of 52. Some of you have had several different methods in simplifying radicals. You can use the factor tree, where you would have the square root of 52. And so this ends up being 2 times 26. Bring down the 2. And then you have 2 times 13. And so you know that 2 times 2 times 13 equals 52, but we have to have the square root. You see the 2 right there? 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 is a perfect square number. And the square root of 4 equals 2. That's why we always say that we circle 2 and we only take out 1. And then the 13 is left in jail. So this becomes 2 square root 13. And that is what AD is 2 square root 13. Now, you might be asked to figure out what the exact value is for the perimeter. And so I wanted to show you how you can do that. Whenever you figure perimeter, you're adding up the sides, okay? So we would add 4 plus square root 13 for the BC plus square root 13 for the CD plus AD, which is 2 square root 13. Just on a side note, if I have x plus 2x, you would end up combining your like terms right here, and this would all equal 4x right here. Well, that's the same thing what we do with the square root 13. I mean, it is actually a number, but it can be also treated the same way as a variable. And so if we were to go ahead and put a 1 right here and a 1 right here, then we would have the perimeter to be 4 plus, and how many square root 13s? We've got 1 here. We've got another one here, which makes it 2. And then there's 2 right here, so it becomes 4 square root 13. So this is the exact value. And sometimes you might be asked for the exact. But if you put it into the calculator, then we have approximately. And the approximate is going to be 18.422. So that's what our perimeter is. Just watch out for the instructions and what they are asking on the quiz. So this is 18.422. And that's it on our review. I hope that this helps you out. Just go ahead and see if you can practice these problems without the video. Just kind of set aside or cover it up and see if you can practice it. All right, good luck.